The next ones we are going to find the exact values of some common angles, our reference angles, the 0, 45, and 30, 60, 90 triangles. And so two ways we can do this. We can either use our calculator, since we're doing the inverse sine, cosine, and tangent. Remember that if it's cosine to the -1, that means inverse cosine. Arc tangent is the same thing as inverse tangent. On your calculator, you're going to see it like this. Books sometimes use arctangent instead of the -1 exponent. So those things mean the inverse of whatever your angle is. Two ways we can do this problem. One is by using our calculator. One is by using our handy dandy table. We had this table way back at the beginning of the trig section with our common angles and with the sine, the cosine, and the tangent. Remember, we drew the reference triangles and we figured all that stuff out. If you go to Linda's note sheets under your resources, the table's going to be there for you to print out. Sometimes you have to use the table. Your calculator doesn't work very well if you're doing the next ones where we have to do the tangent of something or other. So, tables here, calculator, that will work on these ones here either way. Now what you have to be careful of is when you're doing the inverse of sine, cosine, and tangent, is that for sine and for tangent, you want your answers to be between -pi/2 and +pi/2, which means you're looking for quadrant 4 or quadrant 1. If it's positive, you're going to be quadrant 1. Negative, you're going to be in quadrant 4, but you're going to do the negative angle instead of the positive angle. So instead of 330 degrees, you do -30 degrees. For cosine, you're going to stay between 0 and pi. So you're going to stay in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. Now your calculator knows this, but if you're using the table, you got to make sure you're looking at the right spot, because sine is positive in two different quadrants. We're going to use the one from quadrant 1. Tangent is negative in two different quadrants. We're going to use the answer from quadrant 4 and then make sure we use the negative reference angle. So, if I'm going to use my calculator, again, I have to be careful on how I punch this in so the calculator interprets the right way. To do the inverse sine, we're going to do shift and the sine button. So I'm using the Casio one. If I do shift and the sine button, it gives me the inverse sine, sine to the -1. In parentheses, we're going to do the square root of 2 divided by 2. You can't use the fraction button or the calculator reads it to be square root of 2 over 2 all under the square root. You want it to be separate, the square root of 2 divided by a plain 2. So you have to do it this way. If we do that, parentheses, square root of 2 divided by 2, it's going to give you your answer in degrees because your calculator is in degree mode. 45 degrees. I want my answer in terms of pi, so I have to convert it into radians. Pi over 180, and if I reduce, this goes into here 4 times, so I'm going to get pi over 4 for my answer. So if I'm using my calculator, that's what I would do. If I was using the table, let me bring up a table here for you. I'm going to go into my notes. This one was... There it is. Values of inverse trigonometric functions. And at the end, I'm going to have this great big table here. that you may or may not be able to read on the screen, but I'm going to bring it up. But again, you might want to have that. Now we were doing over here, that moved, the inverse sine of square root of 2 over 2. Since this is positive, we're going to be in quadrant 1. So we're going to go over here to our table. These are our angles in quadrant 1. Since I'm doing the sine, I'm going to look for square root of 2 over 2. Square root of 2 over 2 is right here, which corresponds to radian measures of pi over 4. So remember with sine, you're going to either use quadrant 1 or quadrant 4, but if it's in quadrant 4, you're going to use the negative measure instead of the positive measure, and so I would have to subtract from 2 pi and use the negative angle measure. If I go back to the next one here, the next one says we are going to do the inverse cosine of negative square root of 3 over 2. So we would do shift and the cosine of negative square root of 3 divided by 2. So your calculator interprets that the right way. So shift and the cosine, parentheses, negative square root of 3 divided by 2, close my parentheses, gives me 150 degrees. Cosine needs to be in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. We are in quadrant 2, 150 degrees, but we need it in radian measures. So pi over 180, reducing that down, 15/18 I can divide by 3, so 5 over 6, so 5 pi over 6 going to be my answer. If I'm using the paper, if I'm doing the paper, I have to be in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. I'm doing the cosine. The cosine is negative in quadrant 2. It's positive in quadrant 1. So I'm looking for where do they have negative square root of 3 over 2. You can see right here is negative square root of 3 over 2 corresponds to 5 pi over 6 on my table. So cosine 5 pi over 6. So I would practice it both ways because, like I said, some you have to use the table on. You can't do it on your calculator. And so you want to get used to doing it either way. So here, number 9, we want to find the inverse tangent or arctangent of 0. So I'm going to do shift tangent of 0. Don't really need the parentheses. It wouldn't hurt to put the parentheses there, but I don't think you really need it. Shift. So shift tangent gives you the inverse tangent of 0, and I get an answer of 0. Inverse tangent of 0 is 0. If I'm using my paper, going over to my paper, if I look right here, here's my tangent. Tangent value is 0. You can see I have an answer of 0, and 0 is between positive 90 and negative 90. And so I have the correct one. I wouldn't want to use the one that has 180 because 180 isn't between our negative pi and our positive pi. So 0 is going to be my answer.